There is a particular kind of quiet that comes with a show you have already finished. You are not watching to find out what happens, because you know what happens. You know that the park will still be standing in the morning, that the two friends behind the golf cart will get into some impossible trouble and climb their way back out of it before the credits, that the voices you have heard 100 times will land exactly where you expect them to. Mordecai will sigh, Rigby will make it worse, and somewhere in that softened half-awake state, where the plot no longer needs your attention, the familiar rhythm of regular show becomes something closer to a room you can lie down in than a story you have to follow. That is the comfort, not the surprise, but the absence of it. Tonight is built on a small act of turning that comfort sideways. We take the show you already know, the 8 seasons that ran on Cartoon Network from 2010 to 2017, and we ask what would have happened if a single choice had gone another way. What if Auntie Pops, the illegitimate brother born on Lollyland, had never been separated from Pops at all? What if one of the 6 terror tales of the park had not stayed a story told around a fire, but had followed everyone home? These are the what-if theories, held gently, turned over slowly, the way you might turn a familiar object in the dark just to feel its shape again. Welcome to Velvo. There is nothing here you need to keep up with, and nothing you are expected to remember in the morning. Settle into whatever holds you best, let the light go low, and let the sound of a place you already know carry you the rest of the way down. Stay as long as you like, and drift whenever you are ready. Regular show ran on Cartoon Network for a little more than 6 years, from the 6th of September, 2010, to the 16th of January, 2017, across 8 seasons. On its surface, it was a show about 2 friends who worked at a park and avoided doing that work. A blue jay and a raccoon, a lawn to mow, a boss to disappoint. That is the premise most people remember, and it is accurate as far as it goes. But the reason this video exists, the reason there is anything here worth staying up late to think about, is that the series was never content to stay on its surface. From very early on, it kept opening doors into other versions of itself. Other timelines, other characters wearing familiar faces, whole separate stories folded inside single episodes. Before we build a single theory about hidden meanings, it helps to notice that regular show was already doing this work openly, in plain sight, for anyone patient enough to watch. Consider the anthology tradition the series built for itself. 6 times between 2011 and 2016, regular show set aside its ordinary continuity to produce a Halloween special under the title Terror Tales of the Park, numbered 1 through 6. Each of these specials abandons the single continuous plot and instead presents several separate scary stories, told by different park characters as a framing device. If that structure sounds familiar, it should. It follows the model The Simpsons made famous with its treehouse of horror, where the usual rules of the world are suspended for an evening, and the characters are free to die, transform, and reset without consequence. The first of these aired on the 10th of October, 2011, as the 4th episode of Season 3. The last, numbered 6, aired on the 27th of October, 2016, as the 19th episode of Season 8, near the very end of the series' life. Think about what that span means. For nearly the entire run of the series, from its 3rd season to its 8th, the show reserved a place each year where its own reality did not apply. This was not a rare experiment. It was a recurring institution, a strand woven through the calendar, a promise that once a year the ordinary park and its ordinary friendships would be set loose into a set of small, self-contained nightmares told by the characters themselves. And the wider world treated this as normal. The 3rd episode of Season 4 was reportedly reviewed by critics as a standalone episode, on its own terms. The anthology format was covered as a legitimate part of regular show's structure, not as a spin-off or a novelty, but as one of the ordinary shapes a regular show episode could take. That is a quiet but important detail. The people paying professional attention understood that a show about 2 friends at a park could, without breaking, become a machine for telling many disconnected stories at once. So the anthology instinct was there from the start, formalized, annual, respected. The series liked to multiply itself. It liked to say, here is another version of these people, in another story, under other rules, and then let that version end and vanish when the framing device closed. Hold on to that habit, because it will matter for everything that follows. A series comfortable telling 6 separate what-if evenings across its run is a series already thinking in branches, already at ease with the idea that its characters exist in more than one shape. The second thing Regular Show did openly is give itself a mirror. Late in its life, Regular Show introduced a villain named Anti-Pops, whose real name is Malum Cranus. Now, the character named Pops had always been one of the gentlest presences in the series, a soft, round, well-meaning figure. Anti-Pops is presented as his illegitimate brother, and the two of them were born on the same home planet, a place called Lollyland. Sit with that relationship for a moment. Not a stranger, not an outside invader from nowhere, but a brother, a sibling from the same origin, the same world, standing as the dark counterpart to one of the kindest characters the show ever drew. This is the mirror universe idea in its purest form. The notion that the good figure has a shadow twin who shares his blood and his birthplace, and inverts everything else. The casting made the shadow deeper. Anti-Pops is voiced by Robert Englund, the actor best known for playing Freddy Krueger in the Nightmare on Elm Street films. That is not a small choice. To hand your mirror image villain to the man whose voice defined a generation of dream monsters is to tell the audience, through casting alone, what register this character belongs to. And the series leaned into exactly that association. Anti-Pops first appears in an episode called The Dream Warrior, the 7th episode of Season 8, which aired on the 30th of September, 2016. In that first appearance, he is not yet revealed as Pops' brother. He arrives as a nightmare-invading entity, a thing that comes through sleep, his identity hidden. A dream monster, voiced by cinema's most famous dream monster, entering Regular Show through the door of sleep itself. The layers there are worth admiring. For a video meant to be listened to as you drift off, there is something almost fitting about a villain who chose sleep as his point of entry. From there, the character steps out of the dream and into the waking world of the series. Anti-Pops is fully revealed as an antagonist in an episode called Space Escape in Season 8, where he erases a store clerk from existence and attacks the Space Tree Station. Erases from existence. Not defeats, not injures. Removes, as though the clerk had never been. That single act tells you the scale the show was now working at, because a villain who can delete a person from reality is a villain operating on the level of timelines and existence itself, not fistfights and pranks. And he does not stop there. Anti-Pops returns as the central thread of the series finale, the final antagonist the series ever faced, the dark brother from Lollyland standing at the end of everything the series had built. The gentle show about avoiding lawn work chose, for its last real enemy, a mirror image sibling with the voice of Freddy Krueger and the power to unmake people. That is the direction this series was always quietly heading. And then there is the third door, the largest one, the one Regular Show walked through in its own feature film. Regular Show, the movie, released in 2015 and directed by the series creator J.G. Quintel, is built entirely around alternate timelines. The story centers on a time machine accident from Mordecai and Rigby's high school years. That accident creates something the film calls a timeanado, and the timeanado generates a dark alternate future timeline. This is not a dream, not an anthology story with a framing device that will close and reset. This is the show taking its two central friends and asking, on the biggest canvas it ever had, what their friendship could become if history bent the wrong way. The answer it gives is bleak. In that dark alternate future, there is a version of Mordecai who has been corrupted and weaponized, a future Mordecai turned hostile toward Rigby. The whole comfortable premise of the series, two friends who will always be friends, is taken and broken on purpose. And the film does not soften the moment. The corrupted future Mordecai turns on Rigby in a line fans often quote, seeming to deny they were ever friends at all, and then he shoots him. Read that again and remember what this show usually was. A series whose entire foundation is the friendship between these two, whose ordinary episodes are built on the assumption that the bond holds, chose to imagine a timeline where the bond does not hold, where one friend denies the friendship outright and then fires on the other. The movie premiered on American television on Cartoon Network on the 25th of November, 2015. The man who created these characters, Quintel, directed that image himself. He chose to show us the version of Mordecai the wrong future produces, and he made that version a killer. Now step back and look at the three doors together, because that is the whole point of beginning here. The anthology specials show a series at ease telling many separate what-if stories. 6 evenings across its run, where its reality is suspended and its characters live and die in isolated tales. The Mirror Villain shows a series willing to give its kindest character a dark blood brother from the same planet, a shadow twin voiced by a horror legend, entering through dreams and ending as the final threat. And the movie shows a series willing to take its own emotional core, the friendship everything rests on, and imagine the timeline where it curdles into violence. These are not fan theories. These are things the series actually did, on screen, with intention, under the direction of the person who made it. That is why this video can go where it is about to go. When a series has already told you, plainly, that it thinks in alternate timelines, that it believes in mirror universe villains, that it can shatter its own central friendship in a dark possible future and let one friend shoot the other, then the speculative theories that follow are not a betrayal of regular show. They are a continuation of a habit the show taught us. Everything after this chapter is built on this foundation. The series opened these doors first. We are only going to walk a little further through them, slowly, in the dark, while you rest. Before regular show was a show, it was a set of drawings that already existed for other reasons. This is the part people forget when they picture the origin of anything, that the beginning is rarely a clean act of creation. Mordecai, Benson, and Pops did not arrive together on a Tuesday as a finished idea for television. They came out of J.G. Quintel's student films at CalArts, made years before Cartoon Network had any claim on them, and they carried the texture of those films with them into the world we eventually saw on Sunday nights. When you understand where these characters were born, the tameness of the aired show starts to look like a decision rather than a default. Something was smoothed. This chapter is about what was underneath the smoothing, and what regular show might have been if the sanding had never happened. Consider the film that most people never watch. In 2006, Quintel made a short at CalArts called 2 in the AM PM. It follows 2 clerks working a convenience store and gas station on Halloween night, and the 2 of them eat candy laced with drugs and spend the rest of the night hallucinating. That is the premise. Not a workplace comedy about a bird and a raccoon avoiding chores, but 2 young men on a graveyard shift, dissolving into their own minds because of something they swallowed. And one detail reframes everything. Mordecai, Benson, and Pops appear in that film only as hallucinations. They are not the cast. They are the visions that arrive when the drug takes hold. Figures conjured by 2 altered clerks in the small hours. The characters who would later anchor a children's network program first existed as symptoms of a bad trip. Rigby is not there at all. The raccoon who becomes half of the whole enterprise, Mordecai's constant companion, and the engine of so much of the series' trouble, does not appear in 2 in the AM PM because Quintel had not created him yet. Think about what that means for the shape of the thing. The friendship that the entire series rests on did not exist at the origin. Quintel made Rigby later, specifically as a companion for Mordecai, when he sat down to develop the actual regular show pitch. Skips and Muscle Man came later still. So the ensemble we treat as a fixed and eternal group, the Park crew as a natural unit, was assembled piece by piece, and the earliest piece of all was a pair of hallucinated figures in a story about drugs and a night that would not end. Pops has an even earlier ancestor, and it is stranger than you might guess. In 2005, a year before the convenience store film, Quintel made a short called The Naive Man from Lollyland. In it, there is a prototype of Pops, drawn as an ambassador, and the small plot turns on this ambassador trying to pay a restaurant bill with lollipops and losing his temper when it does not work. Hold that image against the Pops we know. The aired Pops is gentleness itself, a soft and childlike man of pure goodwill, the character the show reaches for whenever it wants to say something sincere about kindness. The prototype is a man who comes apart at a dinner table over money, whose innocence curdles into anger the moment the world refuses to run on his logic. The seed of Pops was not only sweetness, it was sweetness with a temper underneath it, and the series we got kept the sweetness and retired the temper without comment. That short was not a throwaway either. The Naive Man from Lollyland is said to have won recognition at the 2005 Nicktoons Film Festival. So the darker, rawer instinct was not merely tolerated in Quintel's early work. It was rewarded. The version of his sensibility that produced an ambassador melting down over lollipops was the version that collected trophies. Whatever the network would later ask him to soften had already proven, in a room full of animators judging animation, that it worked. Now move forward to 2008 and to the way regular show actually reached television, because the method tells you something about the material. Quintel pitched regular show to Cartoon Network's Shorts Incubator, a program called the Cartoonstitute, and he did it with storyboards rather than a spoken pitch. His reasoning, as he has described it, is that he did not think verbally pitching such an odd concept would make sense to anyone. Weigh that for a moment. The concept was strange enough that he judged it could not survive being explained out loud. It had to be shown, drawn, walked through frame by frame, because words about it would have made it sound like nothing anyone should fund. That is not the description of a safe idea. That is a man protecting something peculiar by refusing to translate it into the language of a meeting. And the network's response has become a small legend because of how completely it went the other way. Quintel has said that Cartoon Network gave the pilot pitch no notes at all. By his own account, he pitched the board and the response was immediate approval, with nothing sent back for revision. No notes. Think about the rarity of that. The odd concept he was too wary to say aloud was greenlit without a single revision requested. Whatever rawness lived in those boards, it passed through the first gate untouched. The show that eventually softened did not start from a place of network caution. It started from a place of network permission, almost startling permission, and that makes the later softening more interesting rather than less. For the first season, the direction was to make what Quintel calls, in effect, TV PG stuff, and to push that rating a little bit further. Read that carefully, because it is an instruction to lean, not to retreat. The network was not asking him to pull back towards something gentler. It was asking him to work at the edge of a rating and then press slightly past it. For a season, the series was being encouraged in the direction of its origins, toward the tone of the clerks and the hallucinations and the ambassador who lost his temper. If you want to imagine the version of regular show that kept its original nerve, you do not have to imagine much for that first stretch. You mostly have to imagine it continuing. It did not continue, and the reason is the quiet turn in this whole story. A couple of seasons in, Cartoon Network told the crew, in effect, that they needed the team to tone it down and take some of that stuff out. This was not guidance offered before the fact, but correction after the fact, which meant the team had to go back and retroactively pull language and content that had already been made, already been pushed a little bit further, exactly as they had been asked to push it. Picture the strangeness of that labor. You are told to press against the edge of the rating. You press, and then you are told to walk back into your own finished work and remove the pressing. Regular show was made to be rawer and then partially unmade. Quintel has an account of why the direction reversed, and it is worth taking seriously because it locates the pressure outside the building. He attributes the tone-it-down notes to complaints from parents rather than to executives. His reasoning is simple and, I think, persuasive. If the executives had been receiving only positive feedback, they would have said, in effect, keep doing it. Networks do not interrupt a thing that is being praised. The interruption came because something arrived from the outside, from the households where the show was actually landing, and that outside pressure traveled up through the network and back down onto the crew as a note about language and content. The rawness did not fail on its own merits. It ran into an audience of parents, and the parents won. There is one episode that shows the exact border between the two versions of this show, and it is excellent, from the third season. The aired version is built around Rigby entering a coma after an allergic reaction to eggs, the fallout of a 12-egg omelet contest, and it is a strong episode. By most accounts, it won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Short-Format Animated Program, one of the highest honors regular show's early run received. But the coma was not the original idea. The original concept had Rigby's vomit from the omelet contest come to life as a monster. That was the plan. The barf from the contest would become a creature, and the episode would proceed from there. Cartoon Network rejected it, telling the crew, in effect, that you cannot have barf come to life. Sit with the two versions side by side, because they are the whole argument of this chapter compressed into one script. The rejected version is grotesque, bodily. A little gross in the specific way that Quintel's student films were bodily and a little gross. Vomit becomes a monster. It is the logic of the drug-laced Halloween night carried into a park cartoon. The world turning strange and physical and wrong. The replacement is illness. Rigby does not conjure a creature out of his own body. His body simply fails, and he slips into a coma, and the episode finds its weight in the fear of losing a friend rather than in the horror of animated barf. One version reaches outward into the surreal. The other turns inward into consequence, and the one that reached outward is the one that got the note. Here is where I will offer an opinion, clearly as opinion, because the facts invite it and do not settle it. The aired excellent is better than the living barf version almost certainly would have been. The coma gives the episode a real stake, and the Emmy is not nothing. So the softening, in this single case, produced the finer piece of work. But that is exactly what makes the pattern hard to judge from the outside. The network's caution did not obviously ruin the series. Sometimes it sharpened it. The living barf might have been merely gross where the coma is moving. And yet the instinct that produced the living barf was the same instinct that produced the hallucinations and the ambassador, and the whole reason the concept was too odd to pitch out loud. You cannot cleanly remove the excess without also reaching toward the source. When you tell a crew you cannot have barf come to life, you are not only cutting one gag, you are teaching them, gently and repeatedly, which of their instincts the world will accept. So imagine regular show that kept the original tone, and imagine it honestly rather than romantically. It would not simply be the same regular show with more swearing, but a show whose pop still had a temper waiting under the sweetness, whose bodily horror was allowed to walk on screen instead of being converted into safer forms of dread, whose comedy still smelled faintly of a graveyard shift and a bad batch of candy. It might have been stranger and less loved, or cut off early by the same parents whose complaints redirected it, or it might have become something rarer. A children's program that never quite stopped feeling like it was made by someone who once drew his gentlest character losing his mind over a restaurant bill. What we can say for certain is that the softening was a choice, made under pressure, after the fact, against a first season that had been told to push further. The rawer show was real once, existing in the boards, and the student films, and the rejected concept. It simply was not the one that got to grow up on the air. There is an episode early in the show, in the first season, that most viewers remember as a comedy of consequences. Rigby eats too much junk food, ignores a direct warning from Mordecai, and pays for it in the most literal way imaginable. His consciousness is forcibly ejected from his body. What remains behind does not lie still and wait to be reclaimed. The body flees. It moves on its own, untethered from the mind that used to steer it. And Rigby, now nothing but awareness, has to chase down the thing he used to live inside. We usually stop the analysis there, at the absurdity of a raccoon running after his own legs. But underneath the joke is a rule, and the rule is stranger and more frightening than the episode ever admits. Consider what Skips tells Rigby once the situation is understood. If the consciousness and the body are not reunited before sunset, Rigby will remain a bodiless consciousness forever. Not for a while. Not until he learns a lesson. Forever. The series sets a hard deadline against the turning of the earth itself, and it never once explains what enforces that deadline or why the sun has anything to do with the soul. It is simply the law of this world, stated plainly, and then the plot hurries past it toward the next gag. Read it as a mechanic rather than a plot device. The body and the mind are two separate objects here. They can come apart, and the seam between them is not permanent, which is to say it can heal shut with the two halves on the wrong sides of it. That is the horror the episode carries without ever naming it. There is a window, and windows close. What makes this episode worth returning to is that it does not leave the idea abstract, giving Rigby a mirror, a living demonstration of the failure state waiting for him. In the garbage truck, adrift, Rigby meets another bodiless consciousness. This one was a bodybuilder, and now it inhabits a basketball. It lost its own body permanently because it did not reclaim that body in time. So the deadline is not a bluff. Somewhere out there, before Rigby ever ate a single chip, this rule already claimed someone, and the evidence is sitting in a basketball in a garbage truck, still able to talk, still able to think, still able to remember what it was. Listen closely to how the bodybuilder explains what happened, because it subtly widens the whole idea. He says, in effect, that his body quit on him from overexertion. He pushed it too hard, and it expelled him. And that is the same warning, structurally, that Mordecai gave Rigby about the junk food. One character strains his body with too much food, the other strains his body with too much lifting, and both bodies respond identically. They eject their occupants. What the episode establishes, almost as an aside, is that this is not a special curse attached to raccoons or to gluttony. Any body can expel its consciousness under enough physical strain. The soul is a tenant, and the lease can be broken from either side. That is the seed I want to sit with tonight. Not the death of a character, but the failure of a system. Because regular show gives us a mechanic that works, most of the time, by a kind of grace. The consciousness returns, the seam heals, the person is whole again. But a mechanic that usually works is also a mechanic that can fail, and the episode has already shown us one permanent failure walking around, or rather, rolling around, inside a basketball. So the question is simple to ask and difficult to answer. What happens if the return ever fails permanently, not by chance, but as the norm? Watch what the bodybuilder consciousness actually does with its freedom, because it tells you something about the nature of these displaced minds. It takes over Rigby's vacated body, climbing into the empty vessel and trying to use it, and it cannot. It cannot lift weights the way it used to, because Rigby's body is not built for that. It is a small raccoon frame with no memory of the discipline the bodybuilder once had. Here is a mind that knows exactly how to be strong, wearing a body that has no idea how to obey it. The skill lived in the consciousness, but the capability lived in the flesh, and separated from each other, neither is enough. A permanent failure of the return glitch would not just leave minds homeless, but every mind mismatched, every skill orphaned from the muscle that once expressed it. A whole world of people who know how to do things they can no longer do. The rescue itself is worth looking at through this lens, rather than the usual one. Mordecai, Rigby, and Skips retrieve the body by running it over with a golf cart. The collision ejects the bodybuilder's consciousness from the stolen frame. And notice, the mechanism for freeing a trapped mind is violence to the body it occupies. The same principle that started all of this, the body expelling its tenant under strain, is now weaponized on purpose. They do not coax the intruder out. They damage the vessel until it lets go. If you take the mechanic seriously, that is a chilling tool to have discovered, that any occupied body can be forced to release its occupant by hurting it enough. And then comes the detail that unsettles me most, the one that hints at what permanent failure might really look like. Once the bodybuilder's consciousness is knocked loose from Rigby's body, it does not return to the basketball, the object it had settled into, the one we had come to think of as its home. Instead, it attaches to a playground slide. Think about that. A displaced consciousness, once cut free again, does not have a fixed vessel it belongs to, attaching instead to whatever is nearest, whatever is available, drifting from a basketball to a slide with no say in the matter. Permanent failure, then, would not be a soul locked in one prison, but a soul with no fixed prison at all, sliding from object to object, a mind that has lost not only its body, but any claim to a stable place to be. Rigby, of course, makes his deadline. His consciousness rejoins his own body before the sun goes down, and the seam heals shut with him on the right side of it. But even his success carries the mark of what it cost. The body he climbs back into is tattered and injured from the golf cart collision, the very method used to save it, and he ends the episode in a cast and a wheelchair. The system worked, and still the vessel came back broken. Even a successful return is not a clean one. The mind and the body were reunited, but the body remembers the violence of the reunion. Here is the honest limit of what the episode gives us, and I want to be careful not to invent past it. Skips does spell out the stakes out loud, warning that once a body slips away, it has to be reclaimed before the sun sets, or the mind trapped outside it stays that way forever. Though the show never actually has to show that clock running out, since Rigby wins the race with only moments to spare. We are told the consequence is permanent. We are shown the aftermath, the bodybuilder stuck in a basketball, already long past his own missed deadline. But the moment itself, the instant the window closes and the return becomes impossible, is never on screen. The series draws the line, and shows us someone on the far side of it, but it never lets us watch anyone cross. And that absence is exactly where the fear lives. We know the failure is real because we have met its survivor. We simply never get to see it happen, which means, in the quiet logic of this world, it could be happening to someone, somewhere, in a garbage truck or on a playground, at this very moment, with no one there to run it over and set it free. There is a version of this story that never gets undone. That is the version this chapter lives inside. To reach it, Mordecai and Rigby do something regular show frames almost casually, the way it tends to frame its strangest ideas. Fleeing a mysterious captor, they climb into the time machine, the same device the series had introduced in an earlier episode, and they push themselves 2 months forward. They are running from a threat in the present. What they find waiting for them in the future is the threat fully grown, already victorious, already finished with its work. The park is gone. In its place stands a construction site, raw earth and machinery, the beginnings of a highway off-ramp. The ramp has a name, and the episode takes its title from that name, Exit 9B. Consider how quietly cruel that is as an image. A park, a place defined by its refusal to be useful, by its long afternoons and its aimlessness, has been paved into an exit, not even a destination, a place you pass through on your way to somewhere that matters more. The show has spent seasons teaching you to love this ground precisely because nothing important happens on it, and now the future has decided that nothing important is exactly what it deserves to become. And the people, almost everyone who worked there has been altered, every member of the park staff except for the 2 who traveled forward in time and, oddly enough, the young intern, who somehow kept his memory intact the whole time. Their memories are wiped, their identities replaced, each of them slotted into a new life that has no room in it for the park or for one another. This is the detail that makes the flash forward more than a disaster. A bulldozed park is a loss of place. A staff scattered into false lives is a loss of self, distributed across a city that does not know what it has taken from them. Look at where they land. Muscle Man, whose entire character is built from crudeness and swagger and the endlessly repeated joke about his mother, is now a professor of quantum physics. The series is not being subtle here, and it does not need to be. The gag is that the transformation is complete enough to be absurd, that the brainwashing did not simply dull him but inverted him, took the least academic figure in the cast, and dressed him in the loftiest intelligence imaginable. Pops, the gentle, wide-eyed innocent, tends a city butterfly sanctuary, which is almost the only new life in the set that feels like it might belong to him, and that near fit is its own kind of sorrow. High Five Ghost delivers pizzas, a ghost, a being of the air, reduced to a route and a schedule and a warming bag. Then there is Benson, and Benson is the one who unsettles me most. The others have been moved. Benson has stayed. He is still on the site, still doing the work, but he is employed now by the bearded stranger who destroyed the park in the first place. Weigh that as a picture of defeat. The manager, the man whose whole identity is bound up in keeping this place running, has not been relocated to a false life somewhere across town. He has been kept exactly where he was and handed to the enemy. His loyalty, the thing that defined him, has been rerouted to serve the person who erased everything that loyalty once protected. That is a colder outcome than a memory wipe. That is being made to build your own tomb and thanking the architect for the job. Regular show gives each restoration a single object, a single trigger, and this is one of the most elegant things the episode does. Memory here is not a speech or an argument. What brings each of them back is a sensation. Pops comes back to himself at the taste of a butterscotch lollipop. High Five Ghost returns at the simple act of a high five, the gesture his name is built from. Muscle Man wakes at a joke about his mom, which is to say he wakes at the sound of himself, at the one piece of language that is unmistakably his. And Benson, the hardest case, the one embedded deepest in the enemy's service, is pulled back by the sight of rotisserie donuts turning. Not a person, not a plea, a slow rotation of food behind glass. The episode understands that these characters are not defined by their histories so much as by their small fixations. And so it is the fixation, not the history, that unlocks them. You do not remind them who they are. You show them the one thing they could never stop loving, and the self reassembles around it. Behind all of this stands the bearded stranger, and his identity turns the flash forward from a mystery into a reckoning with the series' own past. He is Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr., the son of the giant floating head from the second season, from the episode High Score. His father was the reigning universe record holder on the arcade game Broken Bones, a villain built entirely out of a number and the refusal to let anyone else surpass it. When Mordecai and Rigby beat that record, the elder Garrett Bobby Ferguson does not simply lose. He dies, exploding into goo, and that is the thing to sit with. A comic victory, a high score beaten, two friends celebrating in an arcade, and the cost of it was a life. The show played that death for laughs at the time. The future is the bill arriving, because the son has come to collect. His stated purpose in building Exit 9B is not the ordinary greed you might expect from someone paving over a park. He intends to use the completed highway as a portal to the underworld. The ramp is a machine for reviving the dead. Every enemy the park staff ever defeated, every creature and villain and floating head they overcame across the seasons, would be brought back through it, his father among them, and return to the world with a grievance and a second chance. The off-ramp is not an off-ramp. It is a door held open for everyone the series ever put down. This is where the counterfactual of this chapter becomes worth holding in the mind. Imagine the future had stuck. Imagine no one traveled back, and nothing arrived at the last minute to reverse it. No lollipop or high five or turning donuts to wake anyone at all. What would the canon of regular show look like if this were simply the ending, the true and permanent shape of things? It would mean that every victory the series ever gave its heroes was provisional, a loan against a future that intended to call in every debt at once. The park staff spend years defeating monsters, and each defeat is a comedy, quick and loud and forgotten by the next episode. The stuck future proposes that none of it was forgotten, that the dead kept a ledger, that somewhere a son was growing up around the memory of a father who exploded into goo the day two slackers beat a record, and that he was patient enough to build a highway to get him back. And in that stuck version, the cruelty of the individual fates hardens into permanence. Muscle Man teaches quantum physics for the rest of his life, and never once makes the joke that is the truest thing about him. Pops raises butterflies in a sanctuary and never knows he had a home he loved more, or friends who would have crossed time to find him. High Five Ghost delivers pizza into an old age he cannot measure, a ghost with a route and no memory of the sky. And Benson keeps building for the man who took everything, believing the work is his own, believing the stranger is his employer and not his conqueror. In that world, the restorations never happen because the objects never arrive. The self, without its one small anchor, simply does not reassemble. It stays scattered. That, I think, is the quiet horror the episode is gesturing at underneath its jokes. Identity here is fragile enough to be undone by a memory wipe, and specific enough that it can only be rebuilt by exactly the right sensation, and if that sensation never comes, the person is gone in every way that counts while the body walks around teaching physics. But the future does not stick, and the way it is prevented is worth studying because it refuses grandeur. Mordecai and Rigby do not outfight Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr. They do not outscore him the way they once outscored his father at Broken Bones. They defeat the plan by swapping the document. At the last moment, they exchange the legal paper, the one that would finalize the portal, so that when the intern Thomas signs it, believing he is completing one thing, he is in fact completing its opposite. His signature saves the park instead of opening the door. The revived villains are sent back to the afterlife. The whole apocalyptic machinery of the off-ramp, the highway to the underworld, the resurrection of every old enemy, is undone by a piece of paper handed to the wrong person at the right time. There is something almost deflating about it, and I mean that as praise. The threat was cosmic, the counter is bureaucratic. A revenge decades in the making, a portal to the land of the dead, and it comes down to which document an intern happens to sign. Regular show is telling you that the grand future, the one with the bulldozers and the brainwashing and the son of the floating head, was always resting on a single ordinary point of failure, a signature that could be redirected. The grim future was real. It was standing all around them, fully built, fully populated with the erased lives of their friends. And it was undone not by strength but by a swap, a substitution, the smallest possible intervention at the last possible moment. Hold both of those truths together as you drift, the enormity of what was almost permanent and the slightness of what unmade it, and you have the strange, tilted logic that this show returns to again and again. There is a Nintendo game most people forgot existed, and it deserves attention here not because it is good, because it is not, but because of what it accidentally proposes. It is called Regular Show, Mordecai and Rigby in 8-bit land, and it arrived on the Nintendo 3DS in the autumn of 2013, on the 29th of October in North America, the 8th of November in Europe, and a few days later, on the 12th, in Australia. WayForward Technologies built it, D3 Publisher put it out in North America, and Namco Bandai handled Europe. That is the kind of dry production ledger that usually opens a footnote and closes it just as quickly. Here it opens a question that the show itself never sat down to answer. The premise is simple, and it is the reason this chapter exists. A mysterious new console arrives at the park. Mordecai and Rigby turn it on, and they are physically pulled through the television screen into an 8-bit video game world. Not watching a game, inside one. Their bodies, or whatever passes for their bodies now, are rendered down into the blocky grammar of an older machine, and they have to move through it to get home. Think about what that transformation actually is for a moment. The two of them do not merely enter a game, they are translated into it. They become data shaped like themselves, and that distinction is going to matter more than the game ever intended it to. What they find inside is a world with rules that keep changing under their feet. The design alternates between 3 separate modes, and the switching is the whole personality of the thing. Most of the time it is side-scrolling platforming, where Mordecai can double jump and Rigby can crawl into tight spaces, each of them reduced to a single mechanical verb. Then, without much ceremony, Mordecai stops being a bird and becomes a spaceship in a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, firing across the screen. Then the camera lifts overhead and you are steering Rigby through a top-down shooter section. 4 themed worlds, 16 levels in total. That is the shape of their captivity, if you want to call it that. And I do want to call it that, because for the length of the game, neither of them has any existence outside those levels. They are what the level needs them to be. A jumper, a ship, a moving gun. Notice who is not there with them. In the entire game, only one other member of the core cast appears, and that is Benson. Skips does not appear. Pops does not appear. Muscle Man does not appear. The park that the series spends its whole run building into a small, crowded family is emptied out to almost nothing. 2 playable friends and a boss, and everyone else simply does not render. For a franchise whose emotional weight comes from its ensemble, that absence is striking, and it feeds directly into the theory this chapter is here to sit with. When you make a digital copy of these characters, what do you keep and what do you discard without noticing? 8-bit land keeps the 2 workers and the man who tells them what to do, and it decides the rest of them are not necessary to the machine. That is a copy with most of the soul edited out. Now, the game does not float free of Regular Show. It is officially based on the 2-part Season 4 premiere, the episode Exit 9B, which first aired on the 1st of October 2012. And the game's final world is where the 2 pieces of fiction touch. That last world recreates Exit 9B in 8-bit form, and it reveals something that folds back on itself in a way worth slowing down for. Inside the game world, Garrett Bobby Ferguson and his son have built an 8-bit version of the Exit 9B portal. So Mordecai and Rigby, already pulled through one screen into a game, walk toward a second portal built inside that game, a portal that is itself a recreation of the exact event that this entire product was based on. A copy of a portal, inside a copy of a world, staged by copies of the villains. If you have ever wanted a clean image of what a digital duplicate of a story looks like, that is it. The game does not adapt Exit 9B so much as it rebuilds it one layer down, in a rougher resolution, and asks the heroes to survive their own premise a second time. And then the ending, which is where the theory sharpens to a point. The in-game house explodes, and that explosion is what returns Mordecai and Rigby to the real world. They are out. They are back in their own resolution, their own bodies, the ordinary park. Benson is right there waiting, and he tells them in effect to finish mowing the lawn or be fired. This is the most Regular Show sentence imaginable, the small, crushing weight of a chore after an impossible adventure. And here is what they do. They choose to jump back into the game rather than mow the lawn. They had escaped. The door home was open, and they had already walked through it. And they turned around and went back in. Hold that choice in mind, because the whole chapter has been building toward it. The game frames this as a joke, a punchline about two lazy characters who would rather play than work. And on the surface, that is exactly what it is. But run the theory forward, and the joke gets colder. If they had jumped back in and simply not come out again, if that last leap had been permanent, what would have been left of them? Not Mordecai and Rigby as the show knows them. What would remain is the version the game keeps. The jumper and the spaceship, the crawler and the overhead gun, running the same 16 levels forever, with no skips or pops or muscle man to pull them back toward being people. A copy that has forgotten it was ever a copy. An NPC does not know it is repeating. That is the quiet horror underneath the cartoon logic, and the game hands it to you as a gag and walks away. This is the part that connects to the larger question of digital copies in the canon of the series. Regular Show is a series that returns again and again to duplicated and altered versions of its cast, to the idea that a person can be forked, mirrored, or stored, and 8-Bit Land is the bluntest literalization of that idea the franchise ever produced, taking the two central characters, stripping them to their mechanical essence, dropping nearly the entire supporting cast, and then, at the very end, having the originals volunteer to become that stripped-down version permanently. The theory does not require you to invent anything, only to take the ending at its word and refuse to laugh. They chose the copy over the chore. They chose the loop. I want to be honest about the object itself, because the theory is more interesting than the game that spawned it. 8-Bit Land is not well regarded. It is remembered, by most accounts, as poorly reviewed, sitting in the range critics politely call generally unfavorable. Some reviewers at the time went further and called it one of WayForward's weaker outings. And WayForward was a studio with a long history and a real reputation, so that is not a small thing to say about them. None of that surprises me, and none of it changes what the game accidentally documents. Sometimes a franchise's most revealing text is not the good one. A polished game might have smoothed the edges off that ending, softened the choice, given the friends a reason to stay that felt warm. This one is rougher than that, and its roughness leaves the implication exposed. Two characters, reduced to inputs, choosing reduction over responsibility, and the machine not caring either way, because the machine only needs a jumper and a ship. There is one more turn worth making before we leave this. Regular Show, in its actual episodes, always pulls Mordecai and Rigby back. Whatever strange place they fall into, the ensemble reels them home, and the return is the moral spine of nearly every story. The game removes the ensemble and then removes the return, and it does both while smiling. So the version of these two that lives inside 8-Bit Land is a version with the safety mechanisms taken out. No crowd to miss them. No home worth mowing a lawn for. Just the open portal and the 16 levels and the choice to go back. If a digital copy of the cast exists anywhere in this world, this is what it looks like when you stop protecting it. It looks like two friends jumping happily into a loop on a machine that reviewers called the worst thing its makers ever built, and never once wondering whether the ones who came out were quite the same as the ones who went in. There is a particular kind of freedom that comes with a story a show promises to take back. Every October, for 5 years running, Regular Show gathered its cast into a room, or a car, or a bus, and let them tell each other frightening stories. And inside those stories, the writers were allowed to do the one thing the series could never permit itself the rest of the year. They could kill everyone, not for keeps, not in the canon that would still be standing next week, but fully, gruesomely, and with a strange kind of glee. The Halloween anthology, the recurring hour called Terror Tales of the Park, was the show admitting something about its own appetite. Underneath the workplace comedy and the video game logic and the friendship at the center of it, there was a part of this show that wanted to see its own characters come apart. The specials were where that part got to breathe. The first of them aired on the 10th of October 2011 in the 3rd season, and the detail that matters most about it is who made it. Written and storyboarded by J.G. Quintel himself, the man who created the series. This is not a case of a guest writer being handed the scary episode so the principals could take a week off. The person most responsible for who these characters are, the person who invented them and presumably loved them, is the one who chose to skin them, burn them, and behead them. That authorship gives the whole anthology its weight. When a creator does this to his own creations, it is worth sitting with the question of what he is reaching for. The horror is not an outside force imposed on the series, but something from inside the house, from the same hand that built it. Consider the shape of that first special, because it establishes the grammar every later one would follow. There is the segment called Creepy Doll, in which Pops, the gentlest figure in the entire cast, is attacked by his own childhood doll, Percy, come to life. Pops confronts the thing and kicks it into a furnace, where it burns to death. Think about how much is packed into that small story. The most innocent character is given a deeply primal fear, a beloved toy turned malevolent, and the resolution is not a rescue or a lesson, but Pops committing an act of fire and violence to survive. Regular Show takes its softest soul and makes him a killer, briefly, in the name of a nightmare. That is the darkest impulse showing its face early. Even Pops, it says, can be pushed to the furnace. Then there is Death Metal Crash Pit, where Muscle Man and High Five Ghost cross paths with the haunted RV of a dead metal band called Skull Punch and cause it to crash and explode along with its entire audience. The segment ends with Muscle Man realizing that he died too, that he is now a ghost. It is a small twist and an old one, the protagonist who does not know he is already dead, but placed here it does something specific, refusing the audience the comfort of a survivor. The joke is that Muscle Man does not even get to be the one who walks away from the carnage he caused. He is folded into it. In canon, Muscle Man is loud and alive and impossible to get rid of. In the What If, he is just another casualty who has not noticed yet. The centerpiece of that first hour, though, is the segment called In the House, and it is the purest distillation of what these specials were for. A vengeful Halloween wizard moves through the park staff and kills them one by one, and the show does not flinch at the specifics. Muscle Man is skinned alive. High Five Ghost is sucked into a phone. Skips is shoved into a fire. Benson is flushed down a toilet. Mordecai is beheaded. Read that list slowly, and notice that each death is tailored, almost affectionate in its cruelty. A different indignity for each character, rather than a single method applied 5 times. The writers were not being lazy with the violence. They were being inventive with it, which is a more unsettling thing to be. And then comes the reveal that reframes all of it. After finishing the story of Rigby being crushed by a giant egg, Rigby pulls off the disguise. He was the wizard the whole time, telling the tale to scare the rest of the park staff. The murders were a story inside the story, a performance by one of the friends, which means the series has caught you in the act of enjoying your favorite characters being butchered, and then told you, gently, that it was only Rigby playing pretend. The relief and the discomfort arrive together. That framing device, the tale told rather than the thing that happened, becomes the anthology's central defense mechanism, and the second special leaned into it fully. It aired on the 15th of October 2012, and frames its 3 stories as tales told by the park gang while riding to a Halloween party. The car ride is the alibi. Nothing you are about to see is real, the structure promises, because these are just people passing time on the way to somewhere fun. And that permission is exactly what lets the stories go where they go. In the segment called Payback, Mordecai accidentally kills his uncle at a bowling alley, and the uncle's ghost comes back to haunt him, not out of grand cosmic grievance, but because he still wants the $5 Mordecai owed him repaid. There is something bleak and faintly funny in that. Death does not ennoble the uncle or resolve the debt. It just makes him a more persistent creditor. The horror here is petty, domestic. The idea that you could kill a family member by accident and still be nagged about pocket change from beyond the grave. Regular Show is playing with the notion that the dead do not become wise. They stay exactly as small as they were. The other segment worth dwelling on from that second hour is Party Bus, because it contains what may be the anthology's most total erasure. Mordecai, Rigby, Margaret, and Eileen board a haunted bus that ages its riders forward, and then reverses so severely that all 4 of them vanish entirely. Not killed, exactly. Unmade. Aged forward into the old, and then wound back past the beginning until there is nothing left of them at all. And here is where the lens matters, because Mordecai and Margaret and the long ache between them was the subject of an entire other telling. Here that whole relationship, The two of them, plus the friends who orbit it, is simply run backward off the edge of existence on a bus. The romance is not resolved or broken in this version. It is deleted, along with everyone in the seats. Whatever tenderness the canon was still negotiating between those characters, the what if takes the eraser to all four of them in one mechanical motion. That is the special's coldest trick, to take the people the audience is most invested in and remove them without even the dignity of a death scene. The third special arrived on the 21st of October, 2013, as the 8th episode of the 5th season, and its most pointed story is the one called Killer Bed. A convicted murderer named Johnny Allen Wrench, who has somehow been transformed into a bed, is given a job at the park on Benson's suggestion. Then he is killed with axes by the rest of the park staff, after Rigby instigates the attack. Turn that over for a moment. The premise is that the park, an institution defined across the series by its willingness to hire and tolerate the strange and the barely competent, extends that same grace to a murderer, and the story punishes them for it by making the murderer exactly what he was advertised to be. But the resolution is not the bed getting its victims but the staff, led into it by Rigby, taking up axes and destroying him first. The friends become a mob. The darkest impulse in this one is not the killer at all, but how quickly the ordinary characters pick up weapons and swarm. How thin the line is between the workplace and the lynching. Benson's charitable hire and Rigby's violent instinct are two halves of the same joke, and neither half is flattering. By the fourth special, aired in late October of 2014, the anthology had learned to turn its framing device into the payload itself. This one is set up as ghost stories told by the Park gang while driving to visit Muscle Man's mother on Halloween, and its standout segment, Unfinished Business, plays a long game with the audience's assumptions. Mordecai and Rigby return as ghosts, believing that Benson never fired them, going about their haunting under that certainty. And then the twist lands, and it is Benson who is actually dead, Benson who is the real ghost. The two characters most sure of their own version of events had it inverted. Notice what this does that the earlier specials did not quite reach for. It weaponizes point of view. The horror is epistemological now, the fear that you could be wrong about the most basic fact of your situation, that you could be the dead one and not know it. Muscle Man's version of this back in the first special was a simple gag. Here the same idea, the character who does not know he is a ghost, has been built into a full misdirection where the misunderstanding is the whole terror. The last of them aired exactly a year later, in 2015, in the 7th season, and it organized its stories around a rented wishing machine named Racky, under the theme, "Be careful what you wish for." That framing is almost a confession of what the anthology had always been doing. Every one of these specials was a wish the writers were granting themselves, the wish to do the forbidden thing to the characters, and the fifth one simply made the wish literal, and then showed the cost. Rigby wishes to be popular, and the wish transforms him and Mordecai into chocolate, and the two of them are eaten. There is the pattern one more time, laid bare. Rigby wants something small and social, and the machinery of the story converts that ordinary desire into consumption, into the two friends being devoured. The appetite the show has for destroying its leads is made almost transparent here. They become food. Someone eats them. And beside that there is Pops, in which Pops, the same gentle figure who kicked his own doll into a furnace in the very first special, is turned into a werewolf while serving on a jury, and ends up mistaken for the werewolf criminal on trial. It is a fitting near-closing image for the whole anthology, because it returns to Pops, the character the series loves most, and once again makes him monstrous. The first special turned him into someone who could kill. The last one turns him into the accused, the monster in the dock, the innocent mistaken for the guilty, precisely because the story has made him into the thing he is falsely charged with being. Across 5 years, the specials keep circling back to their softest character and finding new ways to darken him, which tells you the impulse was never really about the loud ones, about Muscle Man, or the murderer's bed. Regular Show wanted to see whether it could make even Pops into something to be afraid of, and every October it found that it could. What these non-canon detours reveal, taken together, is a series that understood the difference between what it was and what it contained. In the canon, Regular Show was about people who screw up and are forgiven, who nearly die and are pulled back, whose friendships survive the supernatural nonsense of their week. The anthology was the pressure valve for everything that warmth had to hold down. One night a year, the writers, the creator among them, let the characters be skinned and flushed and beheaded and erased and eaten, and then handed the audience the framing device as an apology: the car ride, the wizard's disguise, the wishing machine. It was only a story, but it was a story they chose to tell, 5 separate times, with real invention and real relish, and the choosing is the tell. The darkest impulses of this show did not hide. Once a year, under the cover of Halloween, they were given a name and a special and an air date, and then folded back, without fanfare, into the friendliest cartoon on the schedule. In the 11th episode of the 2nd season, first broadcast on the 28th of February, 2011, regular show does something it rarely allows itself to do. It takes the character who exists to shout, the character whose entire comic function is to be angry at people who deserve his anger, and it strips him of the one thing that gives that anger meaning. Benson, the gumball machine with the perpetually short fuse, loses his job. Mr. Maillard holds him accountable after Mordecai and Rigby crash a golf cart through the office wall, and rather than firing the two who caused the damage, the owner demotes the manager who was supposed to keep them in line. Benson is reduced to a regular park worker. In his place comes a new manager named Susan. Consider what this premise offers, and how easily it could have curdled. Here is a man defined by resentment, handed a fresh and legitimate grievance. He has spent years enforcing rules on employees who ignore him, answering to an owner who does not respect him, and now the machinery he served has spat him out and replaced him with someone new. This is the exact soil from which villains grow in stories like this one. The loyal servant, cast aside, watching a usurper take his place. If you were building an antagonist from spare parts, you would start here, with a competent man who has been humiliated and told, in effect, that he was never as important as he believed. And for a stretch of the episode, the show flirts with that darkness, though it routes it through comedy rather than menace. Mordecai and Rigby, the very pair whose recklessness cost Benson his position, take it upon themselves to teach him how to slack off. Think about the strangeness of that arrangement. The two employees who have driven Benson to fury for years become his tutors in idleness. He struggles with it at first, because slacking is the opposite of everything he is, the negation of the role that has organized his personality. But then something loosens in him, and he starts to enjoy it. The rage does not boil over into villainy. It dissolves, slowly, into something almost like peace. This is the road not taken, and the episode is subtly aware of it. A different version of Benson, in a different kind of show, meets his demotion by scheming. He learns the new manager's weaknesses. He turns the staff against her, or against Maillard, and he engineers his return through cruelty rather than accident. The bones of that story are all present in this one. What regular show does instead is let him rest. It gives the angriest character a season of doing nothing, and it treats that not as a fall, but as a kind of accidental mercy, a glimpse of a life he never permitted himself to have. Meanwhile, the new manager reveals what she actually is. Susan, installed in Benson's chair, begins gradually transforming the other park workers into physical clones of herself. This is the series making its argument in visual terms. The threat to the park was never Benson's anger. Benson's anger, for all its noise, left every worker intact, distinct, themselves. The genuinely dangerous manager is the one who erases individuality, who does not tolerate difference, who wants a staff of copies rather than a staff of people. Where Benson yelled at his workers to be better versions of themselves, Susan simply overwrites them. Set beside her, the gumball machine's fury looks almost tender. The confrontation comes when Susan orders Benson back to work. He refuses, and here the episode gives him the line that clarifies everything the demotion has taught him. He tells her, and I quote it exactly because it appears verbatim, "I've wasted my whole life at a dead-end job, and I'm not wasting another second working for you." She fires him for it. Notice what that refusal is not. It is not the opening move of a man plotting to reclaim his throne, but a genuine reckoning with the cost of the life he has led. He looks at the years he poured into this park and calls them wasted, and he decides that whatever comes next, it will not be more of the same in service to her. Being fired frees him rather than defeating him. Benson goes to the transformed, Susan-cloned park staff and convinces them to slack off again. and in doing so, he undoes her. The act of idleness, the very thing he had to be taught by his most exasperating employees, reverts the clones back to their normal selves. Consider the elegant logic of that. Slacking, which the whole series treats as the venial sin Benson polices, becomes here the antidote to conformity. To slack off is to refuse the manager's total control, to be a person with your own inclinations rather than an extension of someone else's will. The workers become themselves again by wasting time, and this enrages Susan past the point of any human shape. She transforms into a giant monster and threatens to kill the entire park staff. This is where the episode declares which manager was truly the antagonist. Benson, at his worst, shouts and demotes and fumes. Susan, at hers, becomes a literal kaiju bent on mass murder. Regular show has drawn a line between them that could not be clearer. The angry man who wanted his workers to do their jobs stands on one side, and on the other stands the monster who wanted them to stop existing as individuals at all. Every villainous impulse the premise seemed to offer Benson has been transferred onto Susan and made monstrous, while Benson himself is left holding only his grievance and his newfound stillness. The resolution does not come from Benson, it comes from Leon. In Mr. Maillard's limo, Leon pushes Benson out of the vehicle and takes the wheel himself. He tells Benson that he has already had his season of slacking, and that Benson still has a life to live. Notice that phrasing, because it reframes the entire middle of the episode. The idleness that looked like an accidental mercy, the peace Benson stumbled into, Leon names as a completed thing, a season with a beginning and an end. Benson got his rest. Now he is being told to go back to living, and someone else will pay the price for the rescue. Leon drives the limo into Susan's high heels. The impact makes the giant lose her balance and fall to her defeat, and Leon dies in the crash. His last word is utopia. The show does not explain the word, and I will not pretend to know precisely what it means to him in that final second, but its placement is deliberate. A character sacrifices himself to topple a monster, and the thing he names as he goes is not any concrete place but an ideal. Perhaps the perfect world he imagines is the one where a man like Benson finally gets to live rather than waste away at a dead-end job. Perhaps it is simply the last flicker of a mind reaching for something better than the ground rushing up. The episode leaves it open, and the openness is part of its weight. With Susan fallen, Mr. Maillard fires her with the same blunt authority he showed at the start, shouting, "Hey Susan, you're fired." And he reinstates Benson as the park's manager. So the wheel comes back around. The man who called his whole life wasted is returned to the exact position that wasted it. There is something almost bleak in that, if you look at it directly. Benson learned to slack, declared his job a dead end, refused to work for the new regime, watched a colleague die to save him, and his reward is the chair he sat in before any of it happened. The status quo reasserts itself, as it must in a show that needs its gumball machine back at his post next week. But the theory this chapter has been chasing is answered by that ending as much as by anything in the middle. The premise handed Benson every ingredient of an antagonist. The demotion, the usurper, the humiliation, the legitimate rage. And the series spent its runtime methodically refusing that path. It took his anger and let it soften into rest. The villainy the setup implied, it poured into Susan instead, growing it into a monster so it could be clearly named and clearly beaten. It let Benson speak the truth about his wasted years without turning that truth into a weapon against anyone but himself. The comic relief character was standing at the threshold of becoming something darker, and the episode walked him back from it, without drama, and put him where it found him. Consider how quietly a villain can be introduced. Not with a scream, not with a monologue, but at the very end of an episode, in a single held frame. That is how Antipops arrives. In The Dream Warrior, the 7th episode of the 8th season, which aired on the 30th of September, 2016, the whole running time belongs to a smaller threat. A nightmare alien named Carl keeps breaking into Pops' dreams, and each time he returns, he asks the same two things, over and over, in effect demanding that Pops give up his name and his address. Carl is not asking for himself. He is a collector working for someone he never names, an employer who stays off-screen while the dreams keep happening. Pops solves the immediate problem the way Pops tends to solve problems, which is to say gently and absurdly. He straps Carl to a rocket and fires him out of the dreaming altogether, expelling the intruder from his own mind. It reads as a victory, and in the moment, it is one. But watch what the victory costs. By defeating Carl inside the dream, Pops inadvertently gives Carl exactly what Carl was sent to find. The location is revealed. The employer now knows where Pops is. And only in the closing seconds does that employer appear, voiced by Robert Englund, an actor whose voice most listeners already associate with a monster who lives in dreams. Regular show does not explain him. It simply lets you see him and lets the episode end. Think about what that structure is doing. A season that had been about small trouble, about the ordinary friction of a job in a park, has been building, beneath notice, towards something cosmic, and the first real signal is a face at the edge of a bad dream. If you had drifted through the earlier seasons expecting the usual, this is the moment the floor tilts. The full reveal waits until Space Escape, the 15th episode of the same season. Here Anti-Pops appears in full for the first time, no longer a shadow at the end of a dream but a body moving through the world. Mordecai and Rigby watch him at a space convenience store, and what they see is not a fight but an erasure. Anti-Pops removes the store clerk from existence, simply and without effort, and the two of them witness it. That is the introduction the writers chose for his power. Not a punch, not a beam, but the quiet deletion of a person who was standing there a second ago. Then the threat becomes personal for the whole crew. Anti-Pops attacks the Space Tree Station because he wants Pops, and the assault forces everyone to run. The episode does not tidy up after itself. When the crew flees, the fates of the side characters left behind, Rawls and Chance and Sally and Recapbot, are simply left open, unresolved inside that episode. There is something honest about that choice. A villain who erases people should leave loose threads, should leave you unsure who made it out. The story refuses to reassure you. To understand why any of this is happening, the show asks you to look backward, to an episode that aired months earlier and seemed, at the time, like a strange one-off. Pop's Favorite Planet, the 32nd episode of the 7th season, aired on the 2nd of June, 2016. In it, Pops begins to manifest telekinetic powers, and the powers are not random. They arrive whenever a mysterious planet passes near Earth. At the time, the planet is a curiosity. Later, it is given a name and a meaning. That planet is Lollyland, and it is Pops's homeworld, and its nearness is what has been waking something in him all along. Seen after the fact, that episode stops being a novelty and becomes the first crack in the ordinary, the first hint that Pops was never quite the harmless soul he appeared to be. The finale gathers all of this into a single origin, and the origin is where the real weight of the character sits. On Lollyland, across the 27th through 29th episodes of the 8th season, the natives explain who Pops actually is. He was born as Megacranus, and they describe him as the perfect, the purest form of his species. Anti-Pops was created as his opposite. His name is Malum Cranus, and he exists to balance the purest thing in the universe with an equal and answering darkness. One is not the accident of the other. They are a matched pair, brought into being together so that the cosmos stays in equilibrium. And here the finale offers its heaviest image, one that reframes the entire conflict. Old woven hangings on Lollyland depict earlier battles between the two brothers, fights that stretch back long before the park, before the series, before any of the characters we know. Every one of those earlier battles ended the same way, in a stalemate. And each stalemate did not simply end the fight, it reset the universe. So the war we are watching is not the first war, but one turn of a wheel that has turned many times. Two perfectly balanced brothers colliding, neither able to win, the whole of existence wiped clean and started again as the price of their draw. Let me offer a genuine opinion here, clearly as opinion, because the chapter's question invites it. If Pops was born the purest form of his kind, then his gentleness is not a personality he chose, but what he is, at the root, before any choice was available to him. The counterfactual that tempts you, the idea that Pops might have made a different decision on Lollyland long ago and spared everyone this, may be a decision he was never actually free to make. To be the purest good is to have your opposite created alongside you, automatically, as a law of the universe rather than a consequence of anything you did. Regular show gives Pops the one virtue that is supposed to save people, and then reveals that that very virtue is what summoned the thing trying to erase everyone. If there was a wrong turn, it was not a choice but a birth. The finale battle plays out under the shadow of all those earlier draws. Anti-Pops unlocks a form the show calls the Titan form, and with it, he does what he did to the store clerk, but on a scale that takes almost everyone. Most of the park crew is erased from existence in the fight. Only two are spared, and they are the two who have carried this whole series on their backs, Mordecai and Rigby. It is fitting, in a way, that the balance of the universe comes down to the two characters who are the least cosmic, the least chosen, the most ordinary. What they do next is the hinge of everything. Knowing that the brothers' collision is what resets the universe, Mordecai and Rigby deliberately put themselves between the two colliding punches. They step into the exact point where the balance is decided. The explosion resets the timeline, as every stalemate before it has, and for a moment, it seems the wheel has simply turned again. But this time the reset does not land cleanly. The timeline comes back wrong. Rigby keeps every memory of the erased timeline, the whole of it, intact, while Mordecai's memories return only slowly, coming back to him in pieces over time. That small malfunction matters more than it first appears. For countless resets, the universe has come back seamless, the slate wiped so completely that no one remembered the fight had ever happened. The seam that shows this time, one friend remembering everything and the other remembering in fragments, is the first evidence that the cycle can be broken, that something in the machinery has finally slipped. Pops is the one who understands what that slippage means. He reasons, in effect, that fighting his brother will only ever produce another stalemate, and another reset, and another erased world, forever, because that is what the two of them are built to do. The woven hangings told him as much, so he refuses the fight. Instead of striking Anti-Pops, he takes hold of him, and he flies the two of them into the sun. He does not try to win. He removes both brothers from the board at once, giving up his own life to end the cycle of resets permanently, because the only way to stop a balance is to remove both sides of it together. And the sacrifice does something the fighting never could. Pops' death reverses Anti-Pops' erasure. Every character who had been wiped out earlier in the battle comes back. The purest form of the species spends himself, and in spending himself he undoes the deletion, revives the crew, and closes the wheel that had been turning since before anyone could remember. The one who was born unable to choose his own nature finds, at the very end, the single choice that was actually his to make, which was not how to win, but whether to stop playing. Return, for a moment, to that first appearance, the face at the end of a dream, the collector asking for a name and an address. From the far side of the finale, it reads completely differently. Anti-Pops was not hunting a stranger. He was looking for the other half of himself, the brother he had fought and drawn with across resets no one else survived to count. The name he wanted was the name of his own opposite, and Pops, in expelling Carl, in doing the gentle and slightly ridiculous thing, handed over the address, because a being that pure cannot help but answer even a nightmare kindly. The trap and the virtue were the same act. That is the quiet cruelty the season was building toward, and it was there in the very first frame, if you knew to look. So the what if, the chapter set out to trace, turns out to fold back on itself. What if Pops had made different choices long before the series began? The finale's answer, as I read it, is that the choices were never the point. Two brothers were made as opposites to hold the universe steady, and every version of the story before ours ended in the same draw and the same erasure. The only real difference in this telling is that two ordinary friends stepped into the collision. A reset came back with a visible seam, and a purest being finally chose the sun over the endless rematch. Everything that could be chosen was chosen at the end, by the one who had the least freedom of all. There is a theory that has followed this show around for years. Quiet and persistent, the kind of idea that gets passed between fans in comment threads and long forum posts written late at night. The theory is this: the park is not an ordinary place, but a way station, a liminal space between the living world and whatever comes after. And the people who work there are not simply employees, but souls in some form of holding, watched over, occasionally collected. This is a large claim, and the chapter is not here to prove it, but to look honestly at why the idea took hold, and at the specific moments in the series that fans keep returning to when they build it. Because the interesting thing about this particular theory is not whether it is correct, but how much regular show hands over to anyone willing to read it that way. Start with the figure who gives the theory its spine. Death, an actual Grim Reaper character, arrives for the first time in the second season, in an episode called Over the Top, which aired in May of 2011. He does not arrive as a metaphor or a background gag. He comes because someone has died. Skips, in the middle of an arm wrestling match, accidentally kills Rigby, and Death appears to claim what is owed. What he offers next is the part that lingers. He proposes a wager. Skips can arm wrestle him, and the stakes are Skips's own immortal soul, which Death says, in effect, he has been after for years. If Skips wins, Rigby's life is returned. Think about what that single line does to the world of the show. Death has a history with these characters. He has been waiting. The park, in this telling, is not a place Death happens to visit. It is a place he keeps an eye on. Skips wins that match. Rigby comes back, and Skips keeps his soul, and the episode moves on the way episodes do. But the door has been opened, and the series walks back through it. In the fourth season's last meal, which aired in July of 2013, Death returns, and this time he is not gambling. He is collecting. He had made a prophecy in an earlier season, a prediction that Muscle Man would die in a hot dog eating contest, and now he comes to see it fulfilled. The other park workers try to save Muscle Man. They try to bail him out of the contest, to break the shape of the thing before it can close. It does not work. Death takes Muscle Man's soul anyway. And for a theory built on the idea that this world runs on rules older and stranger than a groundskeeping job, that is a powerful piece of evidence. A prophecy was made. The living tried to intervene. The prophecy held. Set those two episodes beside each other, and a pattern starts to form. The kind of pattern the afterlife theory feeds on. Death is not a one-time villain to be defeated and forgotten. He is a recurring presence with standing claims, a being who makes deals and keeps ledgers, and comes back to settle them. And then regular show does something even stranger with him, something that complicates the picture in a way I find genuinely fascinating. In the fourth season premiere, Exit 9B, the park staff are trapped, imprisoned in cement by the villain Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr. To free them, Skips summons help. He calls on a group of otherworldly allies, and Death is among them, standing shoulder to shoulder with Gary, with Tecmo, with the god of basketball, with the guardians of eternal youth. Consider what that means for the theory. Death is not only a collector of souls in this world. He is, when it matters, an ally of the park. He can be summoned to defend it. The being who comes to take the workers away is also, in a pinch, one of the forces that keeps the park standing. If you already believe the park sits on the border between life and death, that is exactly the sort of arrangement you would expect to find there. Now turn to the other pillar the theory rests on, and it is the one I find most convincing, because it requires no wager and no summoning. It is simply a character who is always there. High Five Ghost is, as his name says plainly, a ghost, and the show treats this as ordinary. What the series never treats, never shows, never explains, is how he became one. He is depicted as having been a ghost since infancy. There is an image of him as a ghost baby, which is to say he was already this before he could have lived a life to lose. The series does not depict a human death for him, or even gesture at one. And this is not an oversight, regular show later corrects. His older brother, Low Five Ghost, is introduced back in the second season's See You There, and Low Five looks nearly identical to him, and is also, of course, a ghost. So it is not one anomaly but a family of them. Fans and critics online have put their finger on exactly this, again and again. They noted that regular show never explained how, or even whether, High Five Ghost actually died, and they called it one of the original series' biggest unresolved mysteries. Sit with the precision of that phrasing for a moment. Not only how he died, but whether he died at all. Those are different questions, and the show answers neither. For most series that would be a loose thread, a thing the writers never got around to. For the afterlife theory it is something better, a clue that the ordinary rules of living and dying do not apply here in the way we assume they do. In a world that is already a way station, you would not need a death to have a ghost. You would only need a place where the two states sit close enough together to blur. The series carries this all the way to its end without ever tidying it up. In the series finale, High Five Ghost marries a human woman named Celia, who had first appeared as his love interest back in the 5th season, in the postcard. A ghost marries a human, and the couple has a son, and the son, like his father, like his uncle, is shown as a ghost. So the thread does not resolve. It extends, passing to a new generation, still unexplained, still ordinary within the world, and strange from outside it. If you are reading the park as a place between worlds, this is the theory's most elegant proof, because it shows the boundary is not a wall. Things cross it. A human and a ghost can build a life and a family across it, and regular show presents that as unremarkable. There is one more moment fans reach for, and it deserves care, because it is easy to misuse. In the 6th season, in the Halloween anthology episode Terror Tales of the Park 4, which aired in October of 2014, there is a segment in which Mordecai and Rigby are dead. They haunt Benson, and the haunting only ends when Benson formally deletes them from the park's employee database, an act that completes their firing. It is a striking image, being fired by being erased, the job and the death folded into the same paperwork. But here is where honesty matters more than the theory. That segment is framed inside the show as a scary story, one of the tales told in the recurring anthology format. It is not presented as an event in regular show's main continuity, so it cannot be used as evidence that Mordecai and Rigby are secretly dead. What it can tell you is something softer and, to me, more interesting. The series' own writers, when they sat down to imagine a horror version of the park, reached instinctively for the idea that the workers are ghosts and that leaving the job is a kind of death. The theory was already in the building. The people making the series knew the shape of it well enough to tell a scary story with it, and that is where I would leave this chapter. Not with a verdict, but with a sense of proportion. The afterlife theory is not something fans forced onto regular show from outside. It is assembled entirely out of things the show chose to put on screen. A death who has been after a soul for years and comes back to collect on prophecies. A death who can be summoned to defend the very people he also comes to claim. A ghost who was never alive, and his brother, and his son. A boundary between the living and the dead that characters cross to marry and to work and to haunt. None of it, on its own, proves the park is purgatory. All of it, taken together, explains why so many people, lying awake and turning the series over in their minds, have come to feel that it might be. The finale that Cartoon Network aired on the 16th of January 2017 does not end where you expect it to end. A regular epic final battle runs across 3 parts, the last of them numbered as the 29th episode of the 8th season, and that last part carries a title regular show had used once before, The Power. Anyone who has followed the series from its beginning knows that name. The name belonged to the very first episode, the first thing the show ever showed us, back when a talking bird and his raccoon friend were arguing over a keyboard that could make anything real. To hand the same title to the final episode is not an accident of a tired writing room, but a signal, placed deliberately, that the story has come back around to its own opening line. And it has, almost literally. Part 3 opens by replaying the events of the Season 1 premiere, nearly beat for beat. The same setup, the same rhythm, the same small argument in the same small house. For a moment, a viewer half asleep could believe the tape has rewound, that we are watching the pilot again by mistake. We are not. What the replay reveals is that the universe has reset once more. The brothers' battle, the confrontation the whole finale has been building toward, ended in another stalemate. And a stalemate here does not mean nothing happened. It means everything happened and then everything started over. To understand why that matters, you have to hold on to the number the episode gives you. Pops and his evil twin, Anti-Pops, have fought to a stalemate billions of times before. Each time the two of them fight to that even, exhausted draw, the universe is destroyed, and out of the destruction, a new one is born, roughly once every 14 billion years. Weigh what that does to the series you have been watching. The park, the coffee shop, the friendships, the whole ordinary world of the series, may be one iteration among an almost countless series of them. each nearly identical, each ending in the same tie, each giving way to the next. The Season 1 premiere was not the beginning of the story. It was a beginning, one of billions, and the finale quietly tells you so by making you watch it happen again. What breaks the loop is memory. Rigby is the first to feel it. The reset has wiped the timeline clean, but something in him does not quite accept the clean slate, and he begins to regain the memory of what came before, through déjà vu, that ordinary sensation of having lived a moment already, here raised to the level of a cosmic clue. Mordecai does not get there on his own. His memory stays sealed until Rigby shows him something physical, a stash of Blu-ray discs the crew had buried, discs the friends had made themselves to document their adventures. It is only when Mordecai sees that evidence, that record made by his own hands, that his memory of the reset timeline comes back. Notice the difference between the two of them. One remembers through feeling, the other through proof. The series needed both, the intuition and the artifact, before its heroes could know what had been taken from them. With their memories restored, and with the power, that same reality-shaping force regular show is named for in its first and last episodes, Mordecai and Rigby travel back to intervene. They aim for the moment of the Pops and Anti-Pops fight, and they aim to reach it before Anti-Pops can destroy the power device in the confrontation. This is the hinge on which the entire cosmology turns. If the device is destroyed and the brothers fight to their usual draw, the universe resets again, and the loop continues as it has for billions of cycles. If something else can happen instead, the loop can end. And something else does happen, though not through force. The resolution the finale chooses is not a bigger blow or a cleverer weapon. Rather than fighting, Pops embraces his brother. The two of them reconcile, and together they fly into the sun, ending the threat without triggering another universal reset. Sit with the shape of that for a moment. Every previous cycle ended in a stalemate, two equal forces canceling each other out and taking the universe down with them. A stalemate is a fight that never resolves, only repeats. An embrace is not a stalemate, but the one outcome the two of them had never reached in billions of tries. And because it is genuinely new, it does not feed the machine that makes new universes. The loop breaks, not because someone finally wins, but because someone finally stops trying to. Then the show does the thing this chapter exists to examine. It skips forward in time, twice. The epilogue first shows the Park crew returning to Earth 3 years after they left for the final battle. And then it leaps again, to a reunion 25 years later. At that far reunion, statues of Pops and his late father stand in the park as a memorial. The characters have lived whole lives in the gap. Mordecai has become a successful artist and has married a bat named Steph, and they have 3 children together. Rigby has married Eileen, and they are raising 2 daughters. Benson has become the owner of the park after the death of Mr. Maillard, and he has married a scientist named Pam. High Five Ghost has reunited with his girlfriend Celia, and the two of them have become touring DJs in Prague. Muscle Man and Starla are raising a family. Every thread the series left loose has been tied, gently, into an ordinary and happy adulthood. Here is where the ending turns ambiguous, and here is where honest readings begin to diverge. The chapter's question is a simple one to state and hard to settle. Is the world of that 25 years later reunion the same universe we watched for 8 seasons, saved, or is it a different one that only looks the same? I want to lay out the competing readings plainly, and I want to be clear that this is interpretation, not fact. The facts are the loop, the embrace, and the skip. What the skip means is left to us. The first reading is the comforting one, and it takes the ending at face value. The loop is broken, no reset occurs. Therefore, this is the very same universe, the same Mordecai and Rigby who buried those discs, carried forward unbroken into their futures. Under this reading, the time skip is a reward. These specific friends, the ones whose memories we watched return, get to keep the lives they earned, and the statues in the park honor a Pops these exact characters actually knew. Continuity is preserved because nothing was destroyed and remade. The world simply kept going, and we are shown it later, older, settled. The second reading is colder, and it grows out of a detail the first reading would rather forget. The universe we watched in the Season 1 premiere was itself a product of a reset. The series opened after a previous cycle had already ended. If our whole 8 seasons unfolded inside one iteration of a loop that had run billions of times, then the characters we love were never the originals to begin with. They were a version. Under this reading, breaking the loop does not restore some true first universe, because there may be no such thing. It only stops the sequence at whatever iteration it happened to reach. The 25 years later world is real and permanent precisely because it is the last one. But permanence is not the same as authenticity. The friends who grow old may be the same friends only in the way each cycle's friends resembled the last, closely enough to feel continuous, differently enough that the word same starts to lose its grip. A third reading sits between the two, and, in my opinion, is the most faithful to what the episode actually does. Regular show refuses to answer the question, because the question may not have a clean answer inside its own rules. Consider how memory works in this finale. Identity here is not a matter of unbroken physical continuity, since the universe has been destroyed and remade countless times, and the characters persisted anyway across those breaks. What persists is not the atoms but the record. Rigby's déjà vu and Mordecai's buried discs are the mechanism by which a self survives a reset at all. So perhaps the honest reading is that the saved universe is the same one in the only sense the show believes matters, which is that the people in it remember. The discs, the déjà vu, the statues, these are all the same kind of object. They are records that let a life continue across a gap that would otherwise erase it. Sameness, in this show's cosmology, is a thing you carry, not a thing you are. The finale then adds one more image, and it is the strangest and quietest of all. Its final scene shows Pops in what appears to be an afterlife, and he is watching. What he is watching is regular show itself, the events of the series, recorded on a VHS tape. When it is over, he ejects the tape, and he says the last line the series ever speaks. Jolly good show. Take that in alongside everything else. The buried Blu-ray discs let the heroes recover their world from inside the story. The VHS tape lets Pops watch the whole story from outside it. The series ends by revealing that it was, on some level, a recording being viewed, which folds the question of the epilogue into a further frame. If the world we watched is a tape, then asking whether it survived intact is a little like asking whether the film you rewatch is the same film. It is, and it is not. The events are fixed. The watching is what changes. Pops, who spent the whole series as the loop's gentle center, is the one given the last word, and he judges the thing he lived through as a spectator would judge a show he enjoyed. The music underneath the closing montage carries its own weight, and it comes from outside the fiction entirely. The sequence is set to David Bowie's song Heroes, released in 1977. Bowie had died about a year before the episode aired, and the choice reads as a tribute laid softly over the images of these characters growing old. There is something fitting in scoring an ending about memory and survival with the voice of an artist who had recently died, whose recorded work outlived him exactly the way the crew's discs and Pops' tape outlived the resets. The song is a record too. It persists. None of this happened by chance, and the last fact worth holding is a real-world one. The creator, J.G. Quintel, has said he began planning regular shows ending during the production of Season 7, after Cartoon Network gave a smaller final episode order. He wanted to end the series intentionally, on his own terms, rather than have it canceled abruptly. That context changes how you hear the whole loop. A story about breaking an endless cycle of resets, about choosing a real conclusion instead of another stalemate that only starts everything over, was made by someone who had just been given the chance to conclude on purpose. Regular show argues, through Pops and anti-Pops, that the way to escape an endless repetition is to reach an ending that is genuinely different from all the ones before. Quintel, handed a shorter final season, made exactly that choice about the series itself. Whether that final world is the one we started in may be unanswerable. What is not in doubt is that the people who made it wanted the ending to count, and built a story in which endings are the only thing that ever truly break the loop. There is a version of this show that never happens, and it begins with the same scene the real one does. Two friends, both 23, read a newspaper. In the episode called First Day, which began its life as the 2009 Cartoonstitute pilot before it was folded back into the second season, Mordecai and Rigby answer a help-wanted advertisement for groundskeepers, and they are hired on the spot by Pops Mellard. Think about how thin that moment is. A want ad in a paper, a man who happens to be there. A yes given before either of them has proven anything at all. Everything the series becomes, every death and every cover-up, and every friendship that later videos have traced across seasons, hangs from that single unlikely hiring, and it would have taken almost nothing to unpick it. That is the first of the loose threads worth pulling on tonight, and it is the smallest and the largest at once. What if the guys never get hired? Not fired later, not replaced later, but simply passed over on that first day. The show does not entertain the possibility for even a second, because Pop says yes, and the machinery starts turning. But the ease of that yes is itself a kind of tell. Pops is warm, Pops is trusting. Pops gives the job to two strangers because two strangers asked. And Pops, we should remember, is not the man whose park this actually is. This is the detail that quietly reframes the whole hiring. Pops Maillard is not the owner. He is the adoptive son of Mr. Maillard, and it is Mr. Maillard who owns the park and who stands, in the chain of authority, above Benson himself. The elder Maillard was voiced with a certain patrician weight, and that casting choice tells you something about where the real power in this world sits. So the man who hired Mordecai and Rigby had no more authority to hire them than they had experience to be hired. Pops offers the job the way a child might offer you a seat at his table, generously, and without the standing to make it stick. The person who could actually undo it was elsewhere, and for reasons the series never explains, he never does. Which brings us to the man who tries. In the episode Replaced, Benson does what the title promises. He does not threaten, he does not warn. He actually fires Mordecai and Rigby and orders them to leave the park. And the shape of it, told from an angle the earlier videos did not take, is stranger than redemption. Benson's plan to be rid of them does not fail because they redeem themselves. It fails because of a pizza party and a pair of sea monsters. The party they throw gets crashed by sea monsters. The crashing ruins Benson's attempt to install his chosen replacements. And out of that ruin, the two of them keep their jobs almost by accident. Consider how little agency they have in their own survival. They are not saved by merit. They are saved by chaos. The same chaos they usually cause, arriving this once on their side. And the replacements themselves are worth sitting with, because the memory of this show tends to smooth them into the wrong characters. Benson's intended hires and replaced are not Thomas. They are an ostrich named Jeremy and a possum named Chad. Thomas did not exist yet. The people who nearly took the guys' jobs were an ostrich and a possum, and the reason the guys are still employed at the end of the episode is that Chad and Jeremy turn the offer down. They decline the work and they fly off with stolen phones. So the entire continuation of Mordecai and Rigby's careers, in that moment, rests on the poor judgment and petty theft of a bird and a marsupial who would rather steal and leave than stay and be paid. There is a whole lingering theory in that. The park does not keep the guys because it wants them. The park keeps the guys because everyone offered their jobs keeps saying no or flying away. The intern comes later, and he is the second thread. Thomas, the goat, is introduced as the park's new intern in Exit 9B, the premiere of the 4th season. For a long stretch of episodes, the theory writes itself, that this quiet, steady, unpaid young worker is being groomed to replace the duo permanently. That regular show is slowly building the person who will finally do what Benson could not, take the mop and the golf cart and the job for good. He is more reliable than they are. He asks for nothing. He is exactly the kind of worker a frustrated manager dreams about. If any character was ever positioned to make the guys redundant, it was Thomas. And then the show detonates the premise. In the special called The Real Thomas, an intern special, Thomas is revealed to be a Russian agent named Nikolai, sent to infiltrate the park for the KGB. The perfect intern was never an intern. The steady young goat who might have inherited the park was a plant, a piece of tradecraft, someone whose whole ordinary presence was a cover for something else entirely. So the theory that Thomas would replace the duo permanently was answered by the series in the strangest possible way. He could not replace them, because he was never really one of them. His reliability was a performance. His future at the park was a fiction he was maintaining on someone else's orders. What he does with that revelation is the part I find genuinely moving, and I will say plainly that this is my reading and not a fact. Nikolai defects. He walks away from the Russian plot, and he goes into hiding to protect the crew he had come to see as friends, rather than staying on as permanent park staff. Read that carefully. Given the choice between the job and the people, he does not choose the job. The intern who seemed destined to take the park instead gives up any claim to it and vanishes, precisely so that the people already there can keep what they have. The replacement removes himself. It is the exact inverse of a hostile takeover, and it closes the door on the theory more gently than you would expect from a story about a spy. The third thread belongs to a party. There is a stubborn little idea that Party Pete, of all characters, somehow owns or runs the park, that the entertainer is secretly the man in charge. The episodes give that idea nothing to stand on. Party Pete first appears in the second season episode that bears his name, and he appears there as a hired party entertainer. He is brought in. He is a service. He is closer in station to a caterer than to a manager, and there is no version of the text in which he holds authority over the place. The park is owned by a Mallard, run by a Benson, and enlivened, occasionally, by a Pete. He does not sit anywhere on the ladder of ownership. He is a guest the park pays to arrive, and even his name resists you. In that first episode, he gives his name as Party Herman Verfall, not Pete. The name we all use for him is not the name he offers. So the character the theory wants to crown as secret owner cannot even be pinned to a stable identity, and regular show goes further still. In the follow-up, Party Repeat, the original Party Pete is revealed to have been a clone, produced by an organization called the Party Starters. Sit with what that does. The entertainer some fans imagine as the hidden master of the park turns out not to be an individual with standing, but a manufactured product, one output of a group that makes party clones. He does not own the park. In a sense, he does not even own himself. He is an item that the Party Starters produced, and behind him is an organization we glimpse and never fully understand. Notice how often that happens across these three threads. Pull on the hiring and you find an owner who never intervenes and a son with no real authority to have hired anyone. Pull on the firing and you find the guys kept employed by a possum's theft and an ostrich's refusal. Pull on the perfect intern and you find a Russian agent named Nikolai who chooses to disappear. Pull on the party entertainer and you find a clone with a false name and a shadow organization behind him. Every small question about who really holds this park, and who was ever meant to, opens onto something larger and stranger, standing just out of frame, and the show is content to let it stand there. So none of these theories close the way a mystery closes, with a solution. They close the way a door closes in a house you are leaving, softly, leaving the rooms behind it dark and full. The duo were hired on a whim by a man who did not own the place. They were nearly replaced, and were saved by animals who did not want the job. They were nearly inherited by an intern who turned out to be a spy and who loved them enough to leave. And the one character some believed ran the whole park was a party clone named, in the beginning, Herman Verfall. Every answer the series gives is really another question, held out calmly, without insistence, for whoever is still awake to turn over in the dark. Everything this park contains has been built on a question, and the question does not change no matter how far the theories reach. What if the ordinary was never ordinary at all? What if the two groundskeepers wasting an afternoon on a rooftop were always standing at the edge of something larger than regular show ever admitted out loud? The idea that has carried every section here is a simple one. Regular show hides its scale behind boredom. It lets you believe you are watching two friends avoid work, and while you are looking at that, it quietly arranges its universe around the space where meaning is supposed to go, and it leaves that space open on purpose. Consider how much of what we walked through depends on absence. The park that keeps its history in silences, the characters who behave as if they remember lives they were never shown living, the endings that feel earned by events that were only ever implied. None of it insists. All of it accumulates. That is the achievement of a series that spent its run pretending it had nothing to say. So the theories were never really about answers. They were a way of taking the show at the seriousness it kept hiding from itself, of treating the joke as if the joke had a floor, and finding that it does. And when the last of it settles, what remains is small and steady. Two lawn chairs on a patch of grass, the cart parked where it always is, the light going soft over a park that has already closed for the night, and no one in any hurry to leave. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.